Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. Today, myself and Simon are just going to have a quick conversation to try and answer a simple question about lead generation and to offer some ideas and tips you can hopefully implement in your own work. We hope you find it of value. And it's just going to be a shorter one today, just myself and Simon. We don't have a guest with us, but we're going to talk about something. Well, actually, Simon and I were talking about this on a phone call earlier on, and as we were talking about it, we kind of thought this is interesting, and actually no one else is talking about this, so let's just bang a microphone on it and sort of do a podcast around it. So it's going to be ill prepared, but we'll give it a go and see how it goes. So Simon, just kind of get us started. Could you explain to people what low-level deception is, and also why, despite the name and what the name might suggest, it's actually could be a big deal?
Sure. So the way I'd categorize low-level deception is that it potentially isn't seen as fraudulent, but it's not necessarily transparent, and you're not being honest or truthful about what you're actually doing. So an example could be, imagine you're sending leads to a client, and you decide to mix in some other type of leads that either cost a different amount for a different channel or older or something else. There's something different about them from what's advertised that the buyer would be getting. And that it's not fraudulent in the sense, the ICO, I'm going to come knocking at your door, because I'm sure there's sort of compliant opt-ins. I mean, there's a bigger problem if there isn't. It's just whether you're actually just whether you're doing exactly what you said you would do.
So it's kind of like misleading, not outright lying to people. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. So, and the reason it happens is it's just to do with money, right? So if you're buying leads, let's put a reasonable value on them at say £50 each, and you're getting a 20% conversion rate, let's say. If I then suddenly put 10% of those leads in a different type, or it's older or something else, and you get a different conversion rate on those, so let's say it's half at 10%, the buyer of the leads, you would think, would say, well, I want to pay a different amount for these, or I don't want them, or it could be they'll pay the same amount and just agree to do it. So it's all just about whether the buyer of the leads is actually aware of whether this is happening or not. And when it's low-level deception, they're not aware that it's happening.
I think the interesting thing you said to me on the phone yesterday, or the way I kind of understood it, was almost like marginal gains in reverse. So it's like doing a little tweaks, and actually they add up after a while. In reverse, it's like you won't notice this kind of deception. You won't notice this sort of money that's kind of being squeezed out. But after a while, it can add up to a big amount.
Well, yeah, this is a point, right? So if you look at, like, say, £50 leads, and imagine you buy 10,000 of those leads over a period of time, so a few months or something, and your conversion rate is 20% on average across those leads that you're buying. Now, let's imagine that 10% of those leads are different in some respect, and they convert at 10%. So if you were the buyer of the leads, just to do it easily, let's say we'd pay £25 for those if we knew what it was, because they're converting at half the rate, and that's going to hit ROI. But you don't know that. You don't know that you're receiving something different. It just gets blended into the whole pot. Now, to the buyer of the leads, if you run across 10,000 leads and remove the £25 that you would have paid, that's 25 grand, right? That's £25,000 that you've now paid for these records. So you might be thinking, well, surely you'd notice in the performance, but you wouldn't, because the performance is 10%. 10% of the leads are only performing at half the rate of the others, which means there's a 5% decrease in the conversion rate. When you actually look at the conversion rate of 20%, the 5% decrease means it's 19%. It's not because the 20% is the 100% of the conversion rate, right? It's not like 0 to 100. So it only drops down to 19%. And there's so many variables in the conversions. So many different elements and people and technology and everything involved, from dialers, from call centers, from the time of day to when people are called and everything. A 1% difference is like nothing. Stuff fluctuates constantly all day, every day, and typically people would look at this and go, it's between I don't know, 15 to 22% conversion rate, and if it's within that area, they're probably happy. So you can easily carry out low-level deception by feeding leads in, and no one would ever know, ever. It'd never get found out.
I mean, I think that's almost proves the point, really. It's kind of hard to keep track of those numbers as you're going over them, but I think that's almost the issue, isn't it? It's sort of like it's very difficult to identify this kind of thing because it's such a small thing. Like it wouldn't be apparently, it wouldn't be obvious immediately to people, but it's only when you look in depth you actually identify it. And you were sort of saying that yesterday that you had like a first-hand experience of this, or can you explain what that was, just without giving too much away?
Yeah, I mean, I worked in lead gen before we sort of went 100% into technology for over 10 years, I think. I probably had low-level deception carried out on me more times than I can ever imagine. So I've been buying leads like as a brand, for brands, generating our leads and everything else. Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest ones that we caught, so I've caught a few of them, was a brand that we were working with who were working with an agency in the middle. So we were effectively the buyer of all these leads and the generator of leads. There was an agency in the middle, and the agency had the contract with the end brand. And we found out that the agency was sort of screwing us over in some way, and misreporting figures and stuff like that. And when we uncovered that, we also uncovered that they were potentially screwing the brand over. And it was to do with that. It was like this sort of low-level deception. Theirs actually changed slightly because it became more of a fraud type thing because they started adulterating elements of data. It was to do with opt-in times and dates. And that's how we realized at the time that we can start sort of stopping low-level deception from being something which is, like, oh, it's just a little bit cheeky, or it's something everyone does, to if you actually carry on carrying it out, it becomes fraud, which is, we set a rule in Datable, which is if a lead comes in and it has a certain opt-in time and date, we'll only accept it if it's within a certain period of time of it being generated. Which means that if you were going to do stuff like take older data and try and feed it into us, you'd have to adulterate the data in order to be able to do it. And that becomes something else. And obviously a lot of this is contractual, right? It's like what you're actually agreeing to purchase as well. So you've got to have the right contracts in place to make sure that because if you just have a contract that says, we'll just buy leads off you for this rate, or we expect this conversion rate, it doesn't really matter what anyone feeds you. That's different. That's not really deception. That's just someone blending data. So it's more of a contractual thing that if you have an agreement to buy apples, and someone starts sending you oranges, but they're painted to look like apples.
Yeah, that's nice imagery for that. But just kind of like,
there's probably a better analogy I could use, right? But just
fruit.
All these podcasts are off the cuffs, which is why there's so many ums and ahs in them. So
exactly, and that's what we said with this one. We almost had this conversation on the phone, and then we just kind of thought, and I thought I've never actually really considered this before. I've never heard anyone else talking about it, so let's talk about it because no one else is. I think that's always interesting. But just to kind of bring things back around, which is what I always do, and try and think about people listening and how they may benefit from this. So you talked about the time one there and kind of the opt-in thing. For brands or lead buyers who are buying leads worried that they may be susceptible to this, and we'll use that particular one as an example, but obviously there are loads more, but we'll use this one. How do brands protect themselves against this, do you think?
So the example we used is a pretty obvious one, right? It's like have the opt-in time as an actual value in the data, not just the opt-in times when you received it, because then you can actually look at that uptime and measure it against when you received it and set rules in place automatically to reject them. And you can, or you know, if you haven't got technology, you sort of have to look through a list or something. That's one type of low-level deception. I mean, there could be other types, which is, I think another thing that we mentioned on the call is we had a client a few years ago now who asked us to bake into the system. They were buying traffic from people, and they said, can you just automatically reject 20% of everything? So we said, like, why? And they said, because we just don't want to pay for 20% of it. So we were like, what, is there something wrong with the data? They were, no, the stuff there's something wrong with, we don't want to pay for that. So we want to remove, you know, bots, fraudulent data, Mickey Mouse records. But then anything that's then legit, we don't want to pay for 20% of it. So I was like, why? They said, because it just doesn't fit in our financials. So I was like, well, I don't know if we sort of could bake that in, really, to be honest with you. It's just something we're going to have to sort out. They actually ended up leaving over it. I mean, you know, we wouldn't bake in a sort of deception. So the point is, this isn't just on a buyer side. I mean, I guess they're buying traffic, but it's also on like a publisher side. So this sort of low-level deception can affect everyone. And it can be difficult to stop. I mean, you know, you need technology, you need contracts in place. Ultimately, you need trust and transparency. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And the sad thing is, you know, you need technology to then prove that trust and transparency when you shouldn't probably necessarily have to, but, you know, that's the case. So yeah, depending on the user case and how the sort of deception is being carried out, there are different methodologies that you can use. Might be worth this, I don't know, doing a blog over it, like, or from this post or something, or we could list a few examples maybe. Yeah,
for sure. Well, I think it's interesting because it's like what I think when we had Alan Desmere from Context State, he was saying the same thing, and it works both ways. You know, it's not just, you know, lead buys can be equally as bad. I think sometimes we forget that, you know, it works both ways. People can be deceptive on both sides, and the lead generator and the lead seller needs protection too, which is really interesting. But
well, yeah, sorry, just on that thing. So there was an example on the podcast that we did with Alan with the landing page, if you remember, where people talking about doctoring the landing page that you actually send and it not being the real landing page. So I think their motivation was the fear that whoever they were sending their leads to would just copy their page and launch their own lead gen. I mean, it's just, that can happen. There's nothing you can do about it other than have contractual things in place, which means, you know, you're not going to do it. But if someone decides to run their own lead gen, what you're going to do, landing pages, you know, you can create them fairly easily and people copy them, but you know, you have sort of copyrights and stuff in place. But it literally all comes down to trust and transparency. That's the only way you can run lead gen.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, I think we've sort of covered that. I think we could go into the other types of low-level deception, but I think the key message we wanted to get across there was it gets missed, you know, and it's people don't talk about it. I mean, it's the first time we talk about fraud all the time, but this low-level thing, it's almost like it's not outright lying. It's withholding the truth almost. It's that kind of thing, and
I think
that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about it is that if you were in any other industry, maybe this happens in all industries. I mean, you know, we know lead gen and marketing and sales, so we talk about it in that. But it's organized to some degree. It's a deception, and it's highly beneficial to the people carrying out the deception. Now, when you think of it like that, like, you name something to me that sounds like, I mean, to me, it sounds like organized crime. That's like almost what it is, you know, where it's like this persistent, constant, organized deception where someone's creaming off the top. And it's one of the things about lead gen. Stuff like this is, I wouldn't say it's accepted, but it's, you know, I know about it because I've seen it and, you know, I know it happens. And And it comes back to this thing of people seeing data like tiddlywinks. Like it's not they forget that they're real people, but it becomes no longer these leads of real people, and they're sort of just snippets of information you can make money from and sort of do what you want, because it doesn't really matter as long as it benefits you. And that's part of the issue. It's the biggest part of the issue, I would say.
Cool. Well, yeah. See, this was just a phone call we had, and we thought let's do a blog about it. Let's do a podcast about it because it was interesting. But low level deception. Yeah. If you something you made aware of.
It's quite a cool name, isn't it? Low level deception. Obviously, it's not a cool name as in what's happening, but it sounds, I don't know.
I don't even mean. Yeah.
I feel like I hope it's a phrase we've coined. We need to look it up and see what.
Can we trademark that? I don't know if we can, but yeah, like, as you said the other day, I was like, yeah, actually, no one really talks about it, and it can have. The name suggests you shouldn't be that concerned about it. It's low level, it's fine, but actually, it can have a big impact if it goes on unchecked for long enough. So yeah, I thought it was worth us discussing that and bring attention to it, and maybe we'll do it again and we'll look at different ways in a future podcast.
Definitely. Cool.
Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast, the show for serious lead generators. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.